Welcome to the Working Without Waste podcast, powered by ERC Midwest, the podcast that's all about sharing ideas and stories that increase productivity and decrease waste in your business and personal life. Today on the podcast, I have Amy Fallucca. Amy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be back.
Amy is the founder of Bravent, which is an HR consulting and recruitment firm. This is my second podcast with Amy. She was on my How Did It Happen podcast earlier, and you should check out that episode and you'll learn a lot more about her. But Amy founded Bravent in 2016. And Amy, can you just start by telling us what Bravent is and what was your motivation for starting the firm and where has it come since you have?
Sure, definitely. So like you said, Bravent is an HR consulting company. We do quite a bit of recruitment as a part of that. I would say about 80% of our business is talent acquisition, 20% HR work, audits, handbooks, things like that. So we work with a lot of small to medium-sized companies. Typically our customers, they either don't have HR in-house or maybe they don't have a specialized skill set like recruiting, as I said, is often pretty typical. Work with companies across the US. And the format of the work, we do everything for the most part remote. As you know, like we did an audit together, so there are things like that we'll do on site, but a lot of the work that we do is remote. And that's a big part of the purpose and reason for starting the company was about 4 years ago, we had our first child, Desmond. And at that time, I didn't want to work full time, but I also recognized that I love what I do. And so I started the consulting business as kind of a way to stay engaged professionally. And since then, by word of mouth, referrals, it's grown significantly. So we now have 5 people working on the team.
Okay, thanks for that. So Amy and I met because we were putting ERC Midwest together. This was in the early stages, and we had purchased AMS Environmental, and we were looking to make another purchase. And both of the companies that we purchased initially, which was AMS and Elite Environmental, neither had a full-time HR person. And we were sort of going from 2 smaller organizations to come together, and we all of a sudden had, we're going to have about 50 employees, and we didn't have that expertise inside. So Amy had been recommended to me. I can't remember who off the top, Amy, but it was Chris Redholz, yeah. So I was recommended to Amy, and I went to her office, and this is what sort of sold me on it. So I went to her office, which was in downtown Milwaukee, and she had this space inside of another space with another business. And then as I started talking to her, she had been very, very strategic about, knowing what she wanted, first of all, which is what she described, but also knowing that her expertise was sort of here and she needed additional expertise to sort of round out the needs that clients like we ultimately became would need. And so she had this distributed work system before, that's really fancy now. And of course, now with coronavirus, distributed works is like what everyone's doing, but she was kind of onto it before I had ever heard of it. So anyway, that's how we got together. And then she helped us develop a employee handbook and do all the things that you need to sort of check the box with when you have a company, particularly when you have a company that's, approaching 50 people or more than that. I don't remember what all the regulations are, but they change, right? So Amy, what you mentioned that 80% of the work you do is in recruitment, 20% in HR. How did you make that determination, and how can you be most helpful to companies?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because I'd say the secret here, I get approached sometimes by other HR people, recruiters who are thinking about starting their own businesses, and they ask for advice. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I gave to people was not to be hyper focused in any particular area, especially early on as you create your business, but rather to look at what the demand is. So basically, I love HR. I have skills in several different areas. And so when connections would come to me and they'd say, we need a new handbook. Can you help with that? Yeah, definitely. Or we need to hire a CFO. Can you help with that? Absolutely. So I kind of let the market demand dictate what we're doing. So, today 80% is recruiting and 20% consulting. On the HR side, I didn't put a plan together. So I guess my view is just that you should follow, that demand that comes in really easily versus trying to pigeonhole yourself in one specific area.
That reminds me of this guy named Dan Sullivan that runs a program called The Strategic Coach. He's always telling entrepreneurs that the check writers tell you what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. And it sounds like you followed that mantra, right? I mean, people want something, they're willing to pay you for it. You can do it. And so you go where the demand is, as you described it.
Yeah, yep. It makes a lot of sense to do that. I think we connected in the first episode about how a lot of what I wanted to do initially was in career coaching and actually working on the other side with candidates versus corporate. And, just some of the lessons learned from that. And I think the fact that I hadn't invested tons of time, money, resources in building all of that out allowed me to pivot and go to these other areas that I saw, really a great demand for.
And let's talk about the two distinct parts of your business as they relate to companies like ours and others. So for us, like I mentioned, we didn't have an HR program. We didn't have anyone with HR expertise. And we're sort of at this decision-making point. Like, do we find someone and hire a full-time person to be our HR person? Or do we use a distributed model sort of and find someone with expertise? How would you walk someone that's listening to this through that decision-making process, sort of like the way we sort of walk through it?
Yeah, I think we have those conversations all the time.
Yeah.
We're working with growing companies. And so I talk to a lot of customers about, there's probably a time, ideally that you're not going to need our help anymore. Or maybe you don't need as much help anymore. Our goal for our customers is always that we kind of help bridge that gap for them and get them to the point where, they've grown so much that they've got plenty of work to do in-house and hire someone. So some of the different things that I would consider or talk through with a client who's trying to make that decision would be, how many employees is the person supporting? Generally, there's one in-house HR person for every 100 employees. Is that, do you have to stick to that 100%? No, but I mean, that's something to look at is when it gets to that point, there's probably too much work for your admin or your finance person to be supporting that volume of requests and benefit questions and things like that. So number of employees is one thing. Growth plans, so how much hiring are you doing? What volume of positions? And you can look directly at what is the cost to outsource that hiring versus having someone in-house. Do you want a strategic, HR person as a member of your operations team, and in that perspective about how to develop your culture, how to engage your employees? Is that critical, to the functioning and growth of your business, which I think a lot of times it is. Different people can play that role, but that's a factor. Is it a really heavily regulated industry or environment? Are there a lot of compliance and safety considerations? So those are just a few of the things that I would want to talk with the customer about.
And you mentioned a few things there that I want to dig into. One is you didn't say reactive versus proactive, but you sort of positioned, where is HR in your sort of hierarchy of how important it is to the business? And you mentioned culturally. So some people feel like HR is, at the executive level, right? You have to, the human capital in the business is the most important thing. and that the person that's responsible for ensuring that that capital is well cared for and maximized is pretty important. And then you've got this other side that is like, look, the we need to hire people, we need to fire people, we need to discipline people. That's HR. So just, I think I know what your take is on this, but if you could just kind of give us your experience, because I'm sure you've seen it all.
Yeah, I think it's critical to have someone who owns that employee experience and the culture. Sometimes it's founders, sometimes it's owners. So I'm not saying, you have to hire this high level strategic HR person. If you've got someone who's functioning, effectively in that role. So I think it just depends on what the mix of personalities, styles, experience, and capabilities of your leadership team or your management team are. If you're really strong, it's probably okay to get a more junior HR person that's a little bit more administrative. But yeah, of course, I always enjoy when customers are excited and ready to give that strategic seat to an HR person.
Right. Okay, and let's shift to the recruiting side of the business. So that, I actually don't know if we've worked with you on that or not. I'm not sure, but I haven't. Okay, yeah, well, that's definitive. So what's involved in that, and what's the motivation for a company to hire a recruiter to help them fill a position versus trying to do it themselves, or job boards, or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, like I said, they don't have the expertise. Maybe they're hiring one or two people a year. Maybe their business is extremely busy, that it's a situation where the president or whoever would normally do that hiring, there's just other higher value tasks and objectives that they need to be working on. Sometimes they've tried to hire internally themselves and it hasn't worked out. Yeah, so there's a lot of different reasons, but I mean, fundamentally, it's just because it's more effective to have our support in some cases than to try to execute that process in-house.
And what does having your support mean? Can you sort of walk us through what an engagement looks like so people understand?
Yep. Yeah. So we're a little unique, I would say, in the recruitment space. So we don't do any contingent recruiting. And for people who maybe aren't familiar with that terminology, what that means is basically, there are a number of agencies and firms out there that they don't charge you anything unless they find the person that you want to hire. And if they do find that person, then there's a fee that you pay that's typically between 20 and 30% of the person's first year compensation. So it's pretty hefty. If you're hiring a 100K person, that's 20 grand. We work on either an hourly or retained model. So by doing that, we're always paid for the work that we're doing. And we're typically able to fill positions for about 10% of first year salary. So think about it. The reason those contingent firms are charging so much is because they get left high and dry quite a bit. So they're doing a lot of work that they're not paid for. Like I said, we're paid for our work. We're working really collaboratively with the customers. I'll say there were times I actually came from an agency prior to my position at Centare, and there are times where you have a candidate that maybe you have a few concerns, but you're going to pass them along because it's like, well, let's just take a chance at it and see if they like the person. It might come back to bite them later, but their focus is kind of getting those fees. So I just always felt when I was working in that model, like it wasn't the most transparent, collaborative, effective way. It just always felt like a lose-lose situation. If you got the placement with them, they were kind of upset because they had to pay the fee, and they're like, we like this person, but man, this fee. And if you didn't get the placement, you're upset because you just did a lot of work for nothing, right, basically. So we're trying to remove that whole aspect. I also saw situations where the client has two candidates, one that's from an agency, one that's maybe in-house. The agency one might be a little bit better, but that 20 to 30% might deter them from hiring that person compared to the other candidate. So like I said, I just don't think it's a great model to make the best decisions. So went on about that for a little bit, but at a high level, so how it works with us is, when you have a position, might have a job description or not, either way is okay. We talk through you. We talk through it with you. We want to understand, why you need to hire this person, which again is another thing, probably a little different than working with an agency. If you call them saying, I need a new controller, they're just going to say, okay, what, coming right up, and we're going to go, well, why? What's going on? What's the rest of the team look like? What are the challenges that you're working through right now? What are your goals in hiring this person? And sometimes we might say, well, it really sounds like you need, an AP person or an AR person. Really, I'm not sure you need a controller. So we can provide some of that type of advice. Once we have a good handle on what they're looking for, we really scope out the position in a lot of detail. So, what are the skills we're looking for, experience? Do they need to come from a particular industry? What do we think is going to be a reasonable compensation range for the person? What does the interview process look like, both on our end as well as with the client? So really trying to set up a good foundation so that we can find the right people and that we're all on the same page about those top qualities.
Okay. Having been where I have used recruiters, it is a kick in the gut to pay that fee. And then, I think there's usually a 6-month window, or if the person lasts 6 months, the fee is not refundable, or you don't get a chance to find you basically lose your money. And it is, that's a big risk, right? So it sounds like what you're doing is, you're really helping. Your approach is really about understanding why this hire is important to the business, and really getting inside of the business to understand what makes everything work, so that when you go out and look for the candidate or candidates, you have a pretty good idea that, what they'll be walking into, so you can sort of make sure not only do they have the skill set and stuff, but they have all the other stuff that makes them a fit.
Right.
Yeah, not just check the boxes on, okay, yeah, so this degree, that, right, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we all want to think that we're great at interviewing, right, and that we're making good decisions. But a lot of the companies that we're working with, they don't have a sophisticated interview process. They might not even have structured interviews in place. And if you don't have that, then you're just welcoming bias into your process. So it's really working with them to make sure, if they're interviewing people, that they're doing it in a structured, thoughtful way for the traits that we're looking for. And thankfully, we've got, a good relationship with our customers that we can say, I think I've shadowed interviews with customers before, and oh yeah, I really like that person. That person was really great. I think they'd be awesome on the team. I agree. I think that I like them, but I would definitely need to spend more time with them, because I noticed that you talk the whole time.
Oh, right. So I just talked myself into that person being great.
Yeah. Like it's that sometimes the president or founder, they get so excited and they're sharing a lot of information with the candidate that they forget to actually interview them. And, they're nodding, and their responses is like, okay, yeah, this person's good. This person's on board. But, so we can provide kind of that insight to people that it's always helpful to have a second opinion and to get an outside perspective on your approach.
So what's happened with your business from a technology standpoint? How has technology changed it since you started, or helped you, or helped your clients? What's going on there?
Oh man. Well, I can remember when I first started recruiting. There were the common phrase is ATS, applicant tracking system, or you might call it a recruiting system, because now they're much more than just tracking applicants.
Sure.
But at that time, they were around, but they kind of sucked. They were not great, not very user friendly. They didn't add a lot of value. It was basically, a number of fields, and you could maybe store a resume in there. And honestly, my first position, we're taking paper notes, and we've got a little template that we're following. And that would just get stored in a little file cabinet next to my desk, I remember. And I had a folder that said, hot list. These are the really good candidates that I had. And if I was looking for a certain role, I'd open it and I'd flip through the little phone interview notes and resumes. And so that's how it used to be done. Today, we have a really sophisticated recruiting system that it's a universal database that all of our team members have access to, right? So in that scenario, I was just saying, if another recruiter on my team gets a call, they don't know who's in my folder. They don't,
Right.
they don't see those notes. And, say I leave the company, all that data is just on these papers in my desk. And you can bet that no one's going through it and doing anything with it.
Right. So you just lose all of that intellectual capital, so to speak, and all the prospecting that's been done and all the contact. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that like always drove me nuts. And so when I set up Bravent, one thing I wanted to make sure was that we had a solid database and recruiting system in place where we could capitalize on that work product. So for example, one of my recruiters is on vacation. I can go in and look and see, where all of her candidates are at, what their status is, their phone numbers, their emails. I mean, it sounds simple, but most of the companies we work with don't have this in place. So yeah, and the technology, like I said, there's a lot of capabilities. I remember we also used to have to, take that job description we built and manually go out to Monster, Indeed, all these different job boards, and we're posting it and we're having to refresh it. And now through our system, you just put the job description in there and you hit publish, and it goes out to, I think, like 10 to 15 different job boards automatically. So there's been a lot of advancement in technology and how we can use that for recruiting to be more organized, to be more thoughtful. And one of the things that I'm adamant about too is being more respectful in the process. I think we've all applied for a job at one point or another and never heard back. That's a really common experience, especially like during 2008, during these times right now where, so many people are unemployed. And I care a lot about setting up our system so that we can treat people with respect and provide a good candidate experience throughout the process.
When you think about, I just want to go back to HR for a second. When you think about the I guess the things that most often aren't in place that you can help with, I mentioned the employee handbook, for example, and laws are changing all the time, and keeping up with that is very difficult. What are some of the other things that you see companies struggling with on the HR side that you can help bring structure to something that a process that can be followed, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think performance management would be one big area. There are companies, and I wouldn't say like this is our expertise is getting a strategic plan in place for your business, but certainly if you have that, or I can recommend people that is their primary area of expertise. But from my standpoint as an HR professional, taking that corporate plan and objectives and tying it back to what people are actually doing on a day-to-day basis, I think a lot of companies fall short in that process. Either they don't have a plan, or they have a plan, but they haven't communicated the plan. And maybe they've communicated the plan, but they haven't actually set performance measurements and objectives related to the plan. So I think that's definitely a big area.
And you mentioned, times like these, we're in a unique pandemic time where tens of millions of Americans are out of work. Maybe that'll reverse itself quickly. Maybe it'll become the next, depression. Say it's probably anybody's guess at this point, but what do you recommend, not only on the company side, but on the employee side? What do you recommend? You mentioned, be kind to people who are applying for a job, but what else do you recommend, on the getting a job side, and on the, managing probably, layoffs and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I'll break that down, I guess, to two parts of, my advice to job seekers. So one, make sure you've got a really good resume that has a clear objective and summary regarding what you're looking for. I think right now there are going to be a lot of people who are changing industries, changing job functions. And so I think if, say, you're coming from the service industry, but moving forward, you want to get like an admin role or something like that. I think you've got to be really clear about that. I think the second thing would be leverage your network. So who do you know who works at this company you're interested in? How can they help get you connected over there? Um, and then if you don't have those connections, finding a way to make them. And LinkedIn is a really great tool for that. So, you might apply for 20 jobs, but if you don't do any kind of follow up or, trying to see if you can get your resume put to the top of the pile, it's going to be a tough road. But, those people that send a personal message and don't pester the companies, don't call 5 times and email 6 different people, but certainly making a little bit of effort to connect with the person maybe you think is a hiring manager for the role or something like that goes a long way.
Yeah, digging in, right? I mean, you have to show someone like that, sort of like the story that about you getting into Madison, if I remember correctly. If you want something and someone else has it, you have to dig in.
Yeah.
You can't just, submitting a resume or making an application is not, that's just a step. That's not, oh, I've done everything that I can, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we're coming from having, I think, the lowest unemployment rate. It was so low, it was so tough out there. And so it did definitely shift to being a candidate's market that, they could kind of name their price, they could be kind of flaky during the interview process. And some things that I think maybe in today's climate would not be as acceptable. Um, but yeah, I think you've got to go out there and decide what you want and figure out a way to get it.
So this podcast is all about removing waste from your business and your personal life. And so I love the way that we're sort of not, we're a waste company, but we're not, our goal here isn't to talk about, liquid waste and hazardous waste. Our goal is really to talk about how we can, either through the experiences that we've had that we can share, like with you, we want to bring value to people and companies listening about how they can work better, they can work with less waste. So how, both on the HR side and on the recruiting side, how can working with Amy Fallucca and Bravent help remove waste from a person's business or their personal life?
Yeah, that's great. I think we can take a look at how the business is operating. Like for you, we did an audit and we looked at a number of different categories, and we can help people understand maybe where some of the gaps are. And if they're feeling pain, help them understand where that pain is coming from and what possible solutions there are. Um, so yeah, I think we can do that. There's situations with a lot of the companies we're working with. I talk a lot about technology because I come from, over 10 years of working with tech companies. But I think as we're trying to do more with less, we don't have as many people working on site, everybody's remote. It's just really a great time to look at, what is your technology setup in your business, and are there things that you could automate or pieces of software that would help you save money on maybe people resources or time, free up people's time to work on things that are higher value. um, and there's a lot of low hanging fruit, like I said, that some of these small companies, I think about, manual, like written timesheets, manual approvals, very manual payroll process. um, Same thing, benefits election. So I mean, I think as a business you need to really take a look at some of those HR systems that they might have a cost associated with implementing and maintaining them. This is a subscription, but I really think they pay back, in the savings of some of these monotonous, easily automated tasks.
Right. And I wonder, well, definitely. So that's like no value add work really for the business. It'll be interesting to see how AI impacts that to an even accelerated rate going forward, where, anything that you can teach a computer to do, it'll do 100 times, 1,000 times, a million times faster. So when it comes to sort of routine stuff, I mean, that's, you should get on that train, because all that's gonna, right? It's gonna go anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, it's pretty interesting, the things that are out there now. I mean, there are HR systems that can look at your employee base, and they're pulling data from the web, from performance reviews, from their interaction in the systems, and they're rating their likelihood of leaving. Or they might be looking at big data analytics of, if you're a really large company, okay, we've got 300 sales reps and 20% turnover. And if we look at those people, what are the common factors? And can we identify, why those people are leaving, and make some changes based on that? So it's pretty interesting stuff when you look at this HR data at scale.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was just thinking your social feeds and everything, and be scraping all of that. And, as a predictor of, how many people do we expect to churn? Well, what are people saying about us? Not on public message boards, but just on their individual Twitters, because that can all be scraped too. It's not like any of that's private.
Right. Yeah. We implemented late last year an AI sourcing tool. So when we're looking so in recruiting, you have candidates who are actively looking for jobs, maybe out of work or actively looking to leave their position, and you have passive candidates. And we implemented an AI sourcing tool that helps us identify passive candidates from all over the web, Indeed, but also if they have personal websites where they posted resumes. And again, this tool is, I couldn't tell you exactly how it works, but it's scraping all this data, and it's also rating, it's giving us a picture of this person we feel is less likely to leave their job right now. And this person we feel like, okay, they've been in their current position for 6 years. We can see based on their background that around that time is typically when they change positions. They've posted this on their Twitter, whatever it might be. It's pretty crazy.
Man, that can creep somebody out.
Yeah.
I'm calling you because you are posing as a passive job seeker, but you're really,
The internet told me.
Yeah, the internet told me to call you. Yes, because you're ripe for plucking. Yes.
Yeah.
So Amy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, people have, all different perspectives on that, regarding privacy and everything. And I'm kind of in the boat of ship has sailed, our data, it's out there already. These companies know everything about you. And I find comfort in that. It's everybody. It's not just me. They're not, looking at Amy. They're looking at, Amy and people like Amy. And I actually don't mind, being targeted with certain products and things like that I'd rather see something relevant to me. So the data's out there, and might as well use it for good.
Yeah. It's kind of a dichotomy. I feel like most people, they might have, not feel great about the privacy issues, but when they hit their app and they want that Uber there in 2 minutes, right? So they're willing to, you're willing to give up privacy for what you want. You just want to control it for what you don't want. And it's sort of tough to keep that genie, in the bottle, or segregated or whatever.
Yeah. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
So Amy, how can people who'd like to work with you get a hold of you? What's the best way?
Yeah. So my email is amy@bebravent.com. Our website is www.bebravent.com. And my phone number, if you want to reach out directly, 414-978-7792.
Amy, thank you so much for being on the Working Without Waste podcast today. It was great to see you again, and I'm really, really glad that you came on and shared your expertise with us. And I would recommend to anyone listening, even if you don't think you have a need right now, you should connect with Amy, because she can be helpful, and you never know when you will. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I really enjoyed catching up with you too. This was fun virtual COVID edition. And hopefully we'll get to see each other in person again soon.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mike.